So this question is, am I good? Can you hear me?
Yes.
This question is for Dr. Kham. How do parents articulate why they are concerned about something that sounds so nice and touchy-feely as social emotional learning? When I'm trying to talk to another parent or to a teacher about it, what do you think the best way to communicate that would be?
To communicate your concerns about these type of programs?
Yeah.
And you were talking to another parent?
Yes.
Okay, to another parent.
Or to a teacher or to anybody.
Well,
to be
for the
honest,
teacher,
yeah.
I would do some questions. One thing that teachers really resent is the amount of paperwork that they already are expected to produce. That it's less about actual instruction, and it's already historically been about paperwork. Quite frankly, I would, if it were my child, I would say, could you tell me what your ongoing training is going to be? Could you provide me with the materials that you use to prepare for this year's program? Also, I would like a weekly summary from your perspective of the gains that my child has had. And ideally also, if you wouldn't mind, I would really appreciate daily updates so that I can carry your wonderful work in the classroom home with us around the dinner table. I would really appreciate that. And then furthermore, it would be wonderful if you could provide me as a parent with the training that you think is valuable for me to have, and if you could provide me with those resources. Because once we start eating into their time and into their energy, I think, and recognizing that, I would also like to know what your treatment plan is. And could you provide me the references to all the treatment interventions that you would suggest? And I'd like to have options. And I'd like to know also, recognizing, I didn't get into other issues of privacy and confidentiality, but masking the names of the other kids that are in my child's class, I'd like to know what their issues are. If you could provide me with documentation also for that. Because, you know, my child came home the other week and they were upset, and I didn't know that the other one's dog died that week. I would really like to have an update on that. So bombard them with the necessary paperwork that counselors are required to provide.
No, that makes perfect sense. And then,
Kelly, could you have any suggestions that you'd like to add as well? I think that's brilliant, by the way. I think it's so interesting to really drill down on exactly what methods are being used in the classroom. And your point about the other experiences that children are sharing in this group therapy session that's happening, you're right. I mean, they're starting every day off sometimes with this group therapy session where they're marinating in their feelings, and dogs die, and people's parents go to jail, and you know, things happen in kids' lives, and the fact that they're soaking in this.
And we're training up pathology.
Oh, absolutely.
That's what we're doing. We're training rumination. We're training, instead of focusing on what is good, right, and salutary, we're focusing on the very opposite. And then that would be a pushback too. Help me understand in your classroom what you're doing to focus on what's wonderful, what brings children joy.
Right.
When do you do that in your group time?
Right. Because otherwise it's this game of, well, there's something more awful than that.
Right.
Like, oh, I can say something
top
that I can top that. You know, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of what we see on social media
Well,
too,
it's
right?
industry versus inferiority. For middle schoolers, this is a game to them. Who's got it worse?
Absolutely.
My knife is sharper than yours.
Yikes. Kelly, do you have something you'd like to add?
Yeah, when it comes to talking with other parents, if they have not yet had a personal experience of concern with the school district, I think there's multiple ways to talk with parents, whether it's starting a book club in your home and reading a quality book like Abigail Schreier's book, which is going to be highlighted within Moms for Liberty University, or I encourage also what the Teachers Union does. The NEA years ago had been encouraging California teachers to invite groups of parents and teachers over to homes to put out a charcuterie tray, have a nice evening, and then introduce their politics. But you know what? We can do that too. So have a charcuterie tray, have some nice, fun, relaxing time talking with people, but then also have a moment where you're just talking a little bit about social emotional learning. Bring up some of the topics. What do you want for your child's education? Should the school be a place of academic excellence, of merit? Or should the school now be responsible for the whole child, for everything else? Are you comfortable with your children's social and emotional and behavioral scores being analyzed by staff and recorded on data, various data collection agencies? And then when it comes to teachers, one of the things I also observe is that there are many teachers who have been taught and trained that these are good things. And so it's little bits of that relationship, being able to enter and insert little bits of truth. Maybe take them to coffee or bring them a coffee and just have a discussion in the classroom. It may take some time, but there are some teachers that are definitely concerned about this. And the more awareness we build in our communities, the better we can address this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we have a question from online. We're going to start with Jennifer. The question is there data showing that SEL is not helping improve the mental health of students? Is there a possibility that SEL makes bullying worse?
Absolutely, without a doubt. I think when we look at many of the issues that I'm going to just wreck the name, Janet Twenge showed, when we look at generational changes over time, I think that is the illustration of the effect that this is having on an entire generation comes out when we look at their generational norms. The rate of suicide is going up, and we can't attribute it all to COVID. The rate of needing additional psychological services is going up, skyrocketing. There are so many, just look at the generational trends that are happening. It's not just at the individual level that we're seeing that it's not, this generation is in crisis. We're seeing it as a group that they're in crisis. That said, though, I must say that there's a ray of hope that, again, there's a pattern of movement or change. And we grow in wisdom with all of our experiences. I mentioned the kitchen table. We all love the kitchen table that's been beat up, right? We listen to the guy on the train who looks the most haggard, but seems to be the most clean. We like to listen to his stories because he's been through some stuff. That's going to be this generation. They've been through some things at a very young age, and they've had to process way more than any one of us had to process because they've been put in the situation of having to process everyone's problems. Imagine how wise they are going to be. And what is wisdom? It's the ability to solve problems. They may not be able to solve the problems that their generation is facing, but I genuinely believe that there's hope out there, that they're going to be able to help the next generation solve really complex problems because they've been faced with more problems than we should have ever allowed them to be faced with.
And I'm going to challenge everyone, go on X right now or go search online and look at the suicide rates and what happens during school, when school is in session, and when it is not. Because during Christmas break, during the summer, suicide rates plummet. And when school comes back into session, they skyrocket. Why is that? What is happening in these schools that is making these children so suicidal, right? And so that evidence there to me is very, very clear. And I think we need to talk about that more. Kelly, one of the questions, another online question, the go-to pushback when speaking about SEL is often, who doesn't want kinder, more self-aware kids? What kind of a monster are you, Kelly, that doesn't want, a loving, safe, inclusive environment in the classroom? So what are the best key points that you can share to help people to refute something that sounds so good but isn't?
I think it's addressing exactly that tactic is also helpful. I think one of the things that I didn't see in education many years ago is the marketing that does occur. There's organizations that do market this, and I think it's important for parents to be able to tell others, in the same way, this is a very simple example, in the same way you would observe an infomercial on television and you wouldn't just go and immediately buy whatever that infomercial is selling, you'd understand, okay, this is an infomercial as seen on TV. Maybe this is not a product I'm going to be purchasing. But in the same regard, we need to start analyzing the language that's used in these programs, looking into the contracts, looking into the organizations that the schools are contracting with themselves, which you can do from their website, from their social media. Look on Instagram, look on Twitter from these different companies that are being connected to your school. But talking with others, yes, you're going to get pushback, but it's important to encourage them. We have to look beyond the curtain and then start asking pointed questions. How do you feel about the school district installing spirituality into the classroom, especially if it might be different from your families? How do you feel about the school shifting society from individualism to collectivism? And once you have that opportunity to establish those relationships, keep going with the little bits you learn. You can always teach somebody something.
I remember seeing a video from the Fetzer Institute where they said, when we took God out of the classroom, we threw the baby out with the bathwater. And I think we've posted that on our Moms for Liberty Twitter thread before, our X thread. And it's so interesting because they filled this void, right? It's big business, Alex. We've got a question online, and someone wants to know, how do we expose the funding being given to schools to implement these programs? Where, you talked a little bit about the origins. Who's making money off of the fact that 95%, if not more, of schools, public schools across America, are utilizing some type of a social learning, emotional learning program in the classroom?
Yeah, that's a very, very effective tool for getting pushback riled up. When you show people that Bill Gates and the Rockefeller Foundation and these billionaires, and it's interesting because the right and the left can kind of unite on the idea that we don't want the billionaires deciding what our children are going to learn. We don't want the billionaires deciding what kind of spirituality our children are going to have. So this is a really, really effective tool. And a lot of this stuff is pretty transparent. Some of these organizations have Form 990s where you can see where the money is coming from. Some of these organizations even post on their website who is funding them. So you have a lot of these huge so-called philanthropic organizations where there are huge conflicts of interest. Bill Gates' foundation is a good example of that. It looks like philanthropy until you look at the investments and you see he's also pocketing money on the other side. And Bill Gates is actually a really good example on this very point. In 2004, he went over to Paris to sign an agreement with UNESCO, and Phyllis Schlafly ended up publishing that online and making it well known. But he signed an agreement with UNESCO where they agreed, he was signing on behalf of Microsoft, they agreed they were going to jointly develop global education standards, global curricula, global teacher training programs, and global technology systems to implement it all and ultimately to get the data to track it all and manipulate children. Well, who's going to be the beneficiary of that agreement? Well, of course, Microsoft is, and the shareholders of Microsoft are, and Bill Gates is going to be. So right off the bat, you don't have to be an ideologue. You don't have to even disagree with the things they're teaching children to say, wait a minute, this guy's ripping us off. He's doing philanthropy and then making a fortune. And you see the same thing with so many of these other institutions and organizations. There's a huge industry now that is profiting off of this. You look at the amount of money that's spent on public education every year. When you include college, we're talking over $1 trillion a year. There's so much money here. There is so much corruption here. And I would argue that's a very, very effective way to push back on this as well, because no matter where people are on the political spectrum, no matter what religion they are, we all agree we don't need Bill Gates deciding what our kids should learn.
I think that's great. And I think we're really primed, Alex, in this moment right now with Bobby Kennedy coming into HHS and him really exposing a lot of the capture with Big Pharma and a lot of these people that are trying to use their money to transform our country. And I think the American public are really waking up to that. And so showing those connections, showing that there are these global masterminds that are, using our children to transform America is important. I think people are ready to see those connections now. The next question is President Trump aware of how prevalent SEL is in our schools, even in private schools? I think it's worse in private. Does Moms for Liberty know his plans and next steps to rid our schools of this? I'll take this one for a second. Yes, he and his team are aware of it. I was lucky enough to be able to interview President Trump. He really thinks what's happening in the schools is absolutely bananas. He can't believe that it's happening. It's shocking to him. He said when we spoke, I really think they don't like the kids, I think is what he said. He said, I just don't understand how this is happening. Max Eden, a good friend and a fellow at AEI, has done an enormous amount of research on different issues of SEL in the schools, sexual orientation and gender identity being woven into the schools. Max and I had the privilege of being able to work on the education platform for the Republican National Convention. And definitely there was a list of things that also people needed to be aware of. I'm excited because I think that President Trump is picking some excellent people to go and work with him on education who are very tuned in to what's happening in our schools and how it needs to be brought out. Now, how is he going to do that? Well, there are competing ideas, right? You have people that would say abolish the Department of Education. Senator Mike Rounds, we spoke about this a little bit, has a 7-page bill. He's a very nice man from South Dakota. However, one of the questions when I met with him that I asked was, are we cutting the head off of the snake by abolishing the Department of Education? Or are we, in this 7-page document, creating a hydra where we are spreading all of this into the different departments, other departments, where we won't really be able to really end woke, end this toxic ideology and critical theory that's entered our schools, and recapture and reclaim America's public schools. So I think there are some hard questions that need to be answered. He's going to need the help of the legislature. The best advice that I can give American moms and dads in this moment right now is make sure you're talking to your representatives and your senators about these issues. Make sure that they understand what is going on, so that when President Trump and his cabinet members are looking for legislation, for support for legislation, that these representatives understand that you're watching them and you're paying attention and you want them to take action, and you're not going to allow our children to be forgotten. Immigration and the economy, our border, all of these things are so incredibly important. But if we do not reclaim and reform America's public schools, we will lose our country. We will lose this generation. We will lose the next generation. We have to put a focus on our children and prioritize them right now. We've got some more questions. I'm hearing everyone's very much enjoying this. So this is such a wonderful event. You guys are doing such a great job. Let's see. Next question. The curriculum at my son's school is too focused on teaching about tolerance for other religions. What advice do you have for making sure he stays kind and tolerant, but doesn't stray from the light of Jesus and American family values? So this is really a religious liberty question. And I think we're seeing this a lot. And I'll start with you, Jennifer, with the gender identity stuff, right? It really is a teaching that's antithetical to the teaching in the home. Many religions say there are men and there are women, and we were made in God's perfect image. What are your thoughts about this? Or would you like to start?
How long do I have? Okay, so one activity that I have with the students in the classroom at the beginning of the semester, conception. So we're going to become parents this semester. What's one word that you want to focus on as a parent? What's your goal as a parent? And I get all these different words, and so I put them on the dry erase board. I want them to be happy. I want them to be healthy. I want them to be successful. I want them to fight for justice. I want them to not live in my basement. I get some funny responses. And then I challenge them. How many of you in this room are Christian or have a Judeo-Christian background? And sometimes I have them raise their hand. Generally, I just throw it out there. If you're a Christian, this is our goal. It's one word. Heaven is our goal. Heaven. That's our goal. All the rest of this, whether our kids get caught up into SEL or not, I'm glad that this question was asked because, quite frankly, this is the issue of the day. Going back in time, all the generations, everyone who's older has always said the next generation's going to hell. Well, to be sure, a bunch of us have gone to hell. And a bunch of us were happy, healthy, successful, good friends who were global citizens, and they're happy and healthy in hell. The hours of our day that we do have our children for are valuable, and we really need to safeguard those hours. So while they're at school, we fight the good fight and try to talk to our teachers, talk to our principals, galvanize with other parents. But outside of that, those hours are valuable. Where are we on Sunday mornings? We're told to worship. We're told to gather together and be in fellowship with other Christians. After school, how important is that soccer match? After school, is that more important to be with your friend or to be with your brother and sisters? Is that more important to be at my dinner table or at someone else's house? Every single afternoon after school matters. Every single weekend matters. And they add up, trust versus mistrust. Even though they're having 7 hours a day at school with all of this, they hopefully have a lifetime with you and all the people that you're introducing. And that repeated measures over time, that's where it's at. That's where the most powerful shaping occurs. Give them a foundation. And that's you and your worldview, whatever that is. I'm talking from a Christian worldview perspective, but whatever it is, you have the responsibility of instilling that worldview. And you have a shot at it, but it's not going to happen if those after school hours and weekends are sucked up with other activities or work.
I loved that you used the kitchen table conversation because I think one thing that would really help America get back into going in the right direction would be family dinner. Mm-hmm. Sitting down every night with your family, sitting down with your children, talking about their day. So I just loved your analogy in a lot of different levels. So thank you for that. Okay, another question. We've got another question for Jennifer, Dr. Kalm, but I'm going to say, let's see. This is a great question, and I think it's important. Mental health interventions, this is medical care. Parents have the fundamental right to direct the upbringing of their children. This includes their education, their medical care, their morality, their religion. So we have medical care happening in our schools without the consent and knowledge of parents. Someone would like to know, Dr. Jen, what kind of training does a school counselor have compared to you?
Okay, so a school counselor has training specifically for that population. So what I read off to you during my presentation, they would have an undergraduate degree in psychology. They would then go on to have a master's degree. Then they would go on to have licensure. They have continuing ed credits. They're in a position of supervising. If we're going to have these type of programs, they would be in a position of supervising them. But they hopefully, and I don't see it, I'll be honest with my field, I don't see that psychologists have stood up and said we should not be medicating boys for being boys. I didn't see them stand up for that. I didn't see them stand up when we shut down all the schools. I didn't see them stand up when we had the transgender issue, which I teach child psychology. Textbook upon textbook going back decades, I don't see this in the textbooks. This did not come from us. This was not a thing. This was an invention outside of us. What was the original question? I'm sorry.
I think
But so school counselors, right. But one school counselor can do an effective intervention with a child in a one-on-one setting, and then selecting a handful of children, 6 to 8 ideally, in a small group setting under controlled circumstances with children who are at the same point in their grief journey, we'll take it. Children who have recently lost a family member. Now that's something that a school counselor would be, but we would have the parents would be involved.
Right, yeah.
We would have issues of confidentiality that would be safeguarded. For testing and assessment purposes, any intervention we would be closely monitoring. That's what they would do, but they would never do it in an open public access classroom.
No, I always feel like with the there's something called ACEs, these adverse childhood experiences that they and they score children based on how many ACEs they have. And I always felt like with the SEL, even when I was on school board, it was like Oprah, like trauma-informed care for everyone. Like everyone gets a car, right? Everyone gets the same.
One size fits all.
Right, absolutely. Okay, so we have a question from the audience again. So if you'd like to come to the microphone, that would be wonderful.
Yes, this has been a tremendous program. So thank you so much for organizing it, and to each speaker. I feel like you all are so well informed. Just as an audience member, and building on what the first question was from the audience, I've had a conversation with someone who has a child in public school and has special learning needs, and they're concerned. They hear the social emotional learning, and they think, well, the teachers are working with us to teach the child to take turns, to raise their hands. Some of the things that special learning needs take a little extra time with. And so they feel like, oh, well, I need those things as part of and they're not understanding the bigger picture, all the things that you all have talked about tonight. So those things would just be teaching them student skills or life skills. That would be separate from this program. Or what is it? How do I address those concerns with people who say my child needs that extra social emotional learning? And I'm thinking that's not what this is. How do I explain that to them? And I know taking them out to dinner and so forth, but sometimes those things are just a conversation. I don't know how to address that. Thank you.
I can start. Not everything that you're going to see in a socio-emotional learning program is going to be objectionable per se. There's plenty of, and Dr. Kalm alluded to some of this, how to be a better friend. I mean, these are things that nobody in their right mind would find objectionable. And I'm always reminded of rat poison. Right? Rat poison is 98, 99% delicious rat food, but then it's 1% toxic poison that's going to kill the rat. And I think SEL is more than 1 or 2% toxic poison, but there is enough unobjectionable stuff in there that if you just look at it very superficially, you don't know what all the buzzwords mean, you don't want to sound dumb and ask questions, you might say, oh, well, maybe that's good. I do want my child to be a better friend. But as you dig into it and as you see that there's an ulterior motive there. And it's very easy to demonstrate this using their own documents. They will tell you that they're transforming society, that they're transforming the values of your children. So you can say, we can teach a child how to be a better friend without also teaching them that they need to agree with transgenderism or global citizenship or abortion or open borders or drug abuse, et cetera. And so we need to separate the good from the bad and recognize that when you were talking, I was just thinking of Satan, right? He disguised himself as an angel of light. So the SEL proponents are not going to come and say, hey, we're going to destroy your children. we're going to lead all your kids to hell by teaching them to reject your parents, reject God, reject your country. They say, oh, we just want to help your kids. So we've got to look past the marketing, to your point. We've got to look past the focus groups and the studies that they did to make it sound appealing and recognize that there's poison embedded in there. And you can have the good parts without the poison. But this whole SEL banner is, I think, really a marketing ploy, a disguise to conceal the poison so that it can be put in the children. And I think that's what we really need to explain, that there's okay stuff in there, but you can separate that out and not have the poison.
And when you recognize the poison, I think we need to be realistic about where this may end up. Again, as positive as I am about Generation Z and their ability to turn it around, I think in the meantime, I'm thinking back to my graduate training at the University of Kansas. We had a very strong behavioral program, and it was well known for helping kids with autism. And there were parents around the country that would pick up and move their entire lives to Kansas or to the Northeast where there were centers. I think we need to be honest and open that we may get to a point where you need to move. For the safeguard of your children and their everyday experience, you may need to move. And there is no standard curriculum, so it may be in that particular school, it is as simple as, let's practice raising our hand, let's do a Happy As We Know It song. Those are great things. But when you've identified in your community that it's not, and you don't see that you're making headway, this is your child's life and well-being that we're talking about, their very identity. Those parents of kids with autism were willing to leave wonderful practice. It was generally for people who could afford it that could leave. But the reality is, who can afford not to? One of my mentors would always say, children will get your time, your energy, and your money. Your only choice is how to give it to them. Your time, your energy, and your money. This idea that we can kick the can down the road and try to just figure it out later, our children, those issues are going to compound over time, and we may need to consider moving, homeschooling, gathering, seeing what our options are, and they may be radical options.
I just want to give, go ahead.
Oh,
Kelly.
yeah. One of the things I want to add is with regards to any student in school. When I was growing up, my mom often said to me, Kelly, input often equates to output, and what you feed is often what grows. And so when you have a system of a value system being incorporated into the school day, and that is what is regularly fed, I had this happen with a personal experience where the children were taught to try and work things out just themselves. Don't go get an adult right away. Just try and work things out by yourself. And so the way this ended up is that the child in the home life wasn't regularly coming to the parent to tell the parent, hey, something went on and I'm concerned about this. So just that simple habitual thing that was happening in the school day, Monday through Friday, found its way into the home. And so this is, again, such an important reminder that we set a solid and firm foundation for our children, and we're there to encourage them, build them up. Those family meals, those are so important and impactful. It's a great time to ask questions, to instill values and virtues into our children. And I just think that is a big part of this, but also that awareness of what's going on so that you can also make your children aware. Because one of the things that children are used to is saying yes and being obedient, but they have to also be aware that there are adults that they need to say no to. And there's plenty of times when they need to, in the middle of the school day, be having the ability to say, you know what? I'm going to call my mom and my dad. I need to call them right now. I actually need to call them and go to the office and talk to them about this first.
When you're a mom, you tell your kids, you get that, I did, you get that funny feeling in your tummy. Or if you know that something's happening and you think mommy wouldn't like it, you should trust yourself. And I've always felt that social emotional learning is telling that child that funny feeling maybe is a problem they have to get over for the betterment of all of the kids in the classroom. And it's so damaging, and it puts children into these situations where they don't trust themselves anymore. And our instincts and trusting our instincts, like you started with, is so, so important. I'm going to give a huge shout out quickly to the moms and Moms for Liberty who pulled their children out of burning school buildings, but are still fighting for the kids that are inside the schools. We have so many moms who have woken up, who are homeschooling their kids or have moved them into different schools, and yet they are still running chapters of Moms for Liberty, informing their communities, making sure that other people know what is happening with their kids. And being part of Moms for Liberty has been such an amazing blessing because the women are and the dads are amazing warriors. for the children in America. You know, when you go into a classroom as a mom and you volunteer, you're oftentimes not working with your own child. Right? Maybe your kid's doing okay, but you're going and you're working with other children. Moms and dads love kids. And when you see this happening, you need to get in and we need to root it out. So thank you to Moms for Liberty moms and dads. I think we have another audience question. And while you're coming up, I'm going to ask Kelly and Alex just to address this online question. They wanted to know what are the things, the specific mechanisms that are being used in the classroom to turn kids into activists?
Do you want to start?
Sure. One of the things that's happening is particularly introducing kids to different topics. Kids are being taught in many classrooms and through curricula today about who is the oppressed and who is the oppressor. In one school district, I filed a public records request. There were 29 different intersectional identities. They identified who the oppressed was and who the oppressor was, including if you have a clean criminal record, you are now oppressing those who are felons. And it taught that restorative justice was the activist solution. Students are being taught how to go to school board meetings, many times getting extra credit to do so. Students are taught to pair with local activist groups. In California, there's multiple activist organizations that regularly call into the Sacramento State Legislature where I live, but this isn't just California. Students are being taught how to develop a narrative and a counter narrative. When they're going somewhere and they have an activist that takes a different stance, they're taught how to develop that counter narrative to overpower whatever that other person is saying. And they're taught how to understand school board, state legislature, how to go and engage and give public comment. And so in many ways and facets, they are taught activism, and they're taught activism for one political cause. And so this is why it is so important for us as parents. Even if you are homeschooling, I love that Tiffany said that. If you are a homeschool parent, if you don't have children in the schools, you are a taxpayer. You are somebody with a voice. You are somebody with a mind. And many teachers that are activists, some of them do not have children in the school district. So don't let that curtail your efforts to make an impact in your community.
Yeah, I agree 100% with all of that. And one of the things that they do, and I've seen so many different examples of this in different contexts in different parts of the country and even around the world, is once they get children to have the right values, say, okay, injustice is bad, there is systematic oppression. Now let's come up with some hypothetical scenarios. You see XYZ person being discriminated against, or you see this policy that is going to have a disparate impact. How do we go about fixing that? Okay, well, let's do it. And so some really clear examples that I've seen, actually in California, they were giving students money to become activists. They were using taxpayer money and paying them to go out and protest, paying them to get involved in the political process. So that's just about as blatant as it gets. In my home state of Florida, just a few years ago, they were caught in Collier County, which is a very conservative county. And I've got the video of this. They're brainwashing the kids with global warming hysteria, teaching them that carbon dioxide, the gas they exhale, is somehow a toxic pollution. Only the UN can save us. And they do these weird songs. It looks kind of like a cult scene. It's very weird. They dress up as polar bears. And then they get the kids, after all the brainwashing is done, they say, here's a letter. Now, sign this letter. We're going to write to our congressman and tell our congressman that he needs to support climate solutions and carbon reduction. So it used to be more concealed. Now they're just openly telling the kids, if you want to be a good person, you have to be an activist. They're giving them money. They're giving them grade incentives. So, and a lot of it is start with the brainwashing and then give them scenarios and then give them outlets to vent their frustration.
So Moms for Liberty University will be covering something called community schools. And community schools, we'll get into it more, but they seek to make the schools the kind of the social welfare center of the community. And it's very interesting because they bring in school-based health clinics, they bring in counselors. It's a lot of public-private partnership between nonprofits who get access to your children. One of the best questions you can ask is, besides the teacher and the other staff at the school, who will have access to my child this year? What partnerships do you have? Life skills partnerships. Do you have that my children will be taught? And they'll say, well, we have someone who comes in and does drug awareness. Well, my daughter was taught how to make meth. There was a video shown in Florida schools that showed them how to actually make the drugs. Why would we teach a child how to do that? As far as the activism in the letter writing, Moms for Liberty moms and dads will remember letters that came to me, actually, and Tina from a class complaining about Moms for Liberty activism. And they all wrote us letters and told us how horrible we were, and they drew rainbows over everything. And so that was actually happening in a public school where they came after Moms for Liberty. So it's really, really fascinating. Audience question, please.
Hi. I have a question. I believe it was Kelly who brought up student surveys really briefly. Apologize. Okay. I'm very concerned about those and how the data might be being used. Would you and any of you mind expounding more on that and what can parents do?
Yeah, it's really important to be aware of whatever your school district is using. I actually had a insider share with me a little bit about a program called Power School and Schoology, and the degrees to which the students, each individual student was being tracked on their social and emotional and behavioral analysis from the school staff. And that was being saved in Power School. I started reading up about Power School, and they champion themselves about collecting and maintaining this data even when students and their families move. Some of the data may be kept on families. There's teachers that often also do their own data receiving and data surveys that they choose on their own, sometimes without even consulting a director of curriculum sort of person in their district. So in many ways, this is being received digitally. Another thing that's really important to be aware of, and this came especially noticed out of Spreckles, California, anything your child does on that tablet that the school gets is also something that every district can observe. They know what your children are searching. They know what every word is said in the private chat. So you imagine people get nervous about Alexa, these things in their home that might be listening to them, but every single action that they do on those school-issued computers, those Chromebooks, is watched. Yeah. And in Spreckles, California, 2 teachers were faced with legal action because they were actually personally inviting students to an LGBTQ club based on student searches and observations of their students in the class. So
I'd like to add a little bit to that if I can. So it is worse than anybody can actually imagine. It's not just the survey. The surveys are terrible. They're asking kids all kinds of questions that nobody ought to be asking them, the things that even if they weren't gathering the data, would be very troubling. How many sexual partners have you had? Why are you putting that thought in the mind of a 12-year-old? What's wrong with you?
What drugs have you used while you're having sexual intercourse?
Exactly. How does dad talk to mom at home? What kind of food do you have in the refrigerator? Does anybody in your house smoke or drink? I mean, these are questions that the government has no business knowing. Even if they weren't gathering this data, they shouldn't be asking the kids because it puts questions in their mind. But it's much worse than that. I've got reports from the U.S. Department of Education going back well over a decade where they're bragging about hundreds of data points that they're gathering on every single child, everything from dental health to mental health. And now they have technologies. I have a 2012 U.S. Department of Education report where they're talking about some of the technologies that are already in use in federally funded programs. And it's not all schools yet. But one of the things that really jumped out at me was a facial expression camera. And so what's happening is the children are being exposed to what they describe in the report as various stimuli. Maybe there's a transgender individual, a guy wearing a skirt. And then this facial expression camera is supposed to determine what their facial expression is, what that says about their response to it. That is then processed through algorithms, put into a database, and then these are going to be used to determine whether there needs to be an intervention with this child because he or she might have the wrong attitude. Oh, you don't think transgenderism is good? You made a funny face. You've got those bigoted Christian parents. Mm-hmm. This one needs an intervention. And they say in that same report that they're going to use this data to make predictions about the future behavior and beliefs of your children. So all this is being captured. A lot of this got rolled out during Common Core. They bribed state governments to create these state longitudinal databases. They're all interlinked. They all run right to Washington, D.C. So the Department of Labor, the Department of Justice, the Department of Health and Human Services, the Department of Education have all of this data. And it is used, first of all, for helping determine the path that they want these children to take. Oh, this one's going to be a conservative Christian. He definitely can't be a lawyer, a teacher, a journalist, anybody that might influence anybody, right? So we steer him on a different path. But they also use it to manipulate. So as they gather this data on these children, and now with the devices being rolled out, it is orders of magnitude worse. They're figuring out, what do these children believe? Does it line up with the competencies? Does it line up with what we want them to believe? And if not, how do we make them believe what we want? So they stage interventions, and they're getting better and better at this because they're figuring out, well, this worked really well to bring the kids to the attitude that we wanted them to have. So and I could go on. It's terrifying. I've been writing on this for well over a decade. And again, it's not just to help determine the future path of your child. It's also to manipulate your child, and it will be used against them.
And they're also selling their data.
That's right.
I was at a conference, conservative conference, a policy conference, and they allowed the sponsor before the education piece to get up and speak to the room. And it was a career app where the kids could talk about what they like to do, what their skill sets were. They could put in different grades that they had, and it would help to pair them with different career options. And I got up and I said, "So are you selling the kids data?" And he answered, yes. I mean, he had to answer in front of hundreds of conservative activists that, in fact, yes, they were selling the data. And here we were, a sponsor for a conservative policy summit. So they are selling the kids' data. We're going to cover data mining more in SEL 102 with Abigail Schreier. We'll talk about bad therapy. There's a group, Parents Defending Education, that has done a wonderful job at looking at the surveys and how they're data mining the kids. And just to make you aware, the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment says that children are not to be surveyed about any of these issues. This is against federal law, but there's no private right of action. There's no accountability measure. So it's really the fox watching the hen house. You go to the school and you say, "You're breaking federal law. You're asking my kids about all these things you shouldn't be asking them about." And they're like, okay, what are you going to do about it? Right? And so we need that private right of action. You talk about some things that President Trump, that Linda McMahon, the new Secretary of Education, the Office of Civil Rights can do is really start holding these school districts accountable. In the 52 years of Title IX, money has never been withheld from a school district. I think it's time that we start withholding funds from school districts who are breaking the laws and indoctrinating our kids. There was a question I'm going to go to. It's probably the last one, actually, too, because we're going to share a little bit more about what the rest of this month will look like covering social emotional learning. But this question was actually asked twice. What facets of social emotional learning specifically, and Jennifer, maybe you could answer this and start, are good? Where's the boundary between what types of interventions are good and okay, like anger management, right? You don't hit another student in the classroom. How do you handle if you get angry with a child? Is that appropriate for the school to engage in? You mentioned a couple other things, so just maybe if you could give us an idea of, what's okay and then where it starts to veer off onto a bad path.
Psychoeducation in the classroom does have a place. So that is where we are. How do we play well with others? How do we engage in practices? How do we promote? How do we support and encourage one another? Those are all good things. It's only when we start to do that internal reflection that we've crossed that line where we are encouraging less forward focus and more past focus. And when the things that we're talking about here, we're weaponizing children for political agenda. That's what this is. It's social engineering and it's weaponization of kids. And so, again, I would go to, it's in our gut that we all recognize a friendship worksheet is a wonderful thing. We all recognize that these playful songs sitting in circles are a great thing. Saying thank you to a friend, having a thank you program, that's great. It's only when it goes into areas of tell me about and really that more internal dialogue that we're giving teachers permission to go there with our kids, that we never have expected them to be counselors or psychotherapists. There's a space, and I would say it's a box that it is appropriate for teachers, psychoeducational, where you're providing content that can be assessed, and it's really one-directional. And maybe we have some follow-up assessments of, hey, we covered that in the friendship program where you're not supposed to, shove kids. And I noticed you shoved them, and then I provide a consequence. That's fine. But when we get into these larger worldview issues, that crosses a line. That social contract that we made with schools, it goes into a dark place. But that said, we need to be honest and start having uncomfortable conversations as a society, that our schools are in trouble. Kids are coming. I'm from Minnesota. We have kids that come to school in the middle of winter in summer clothes, clothes that don't fit. They're not eating. They're not sleeping at night.
I would challenge you and say, it's not the schools that are in trouble, it's the American family.
Well, that's
in
where
trouble, our
I'm going.
culture,
We need to have uncomfortable conversations that parents aren't doing their jobs. And that's hard to say. Because it sounds like, oh, so you're high up there. Well, yeah, we need to have basic responsibilities as parents and hold one another accountable. And if a child does transgress at school, there needs to be a consequence, and teachers need to be allowed again to provide those consequences.
I think you don't denigrate the ideal because every child doesn't have two parents at home, or that doesn't mean that having two parents at home isn't a good thing, right? I remember when I was on school board, I remember being in the front office, and two little boys got dropped off at school. One didn't have shoes on; they were still in pajamas. They hadn't had breakfast. It was 9:30. And so I went with them to the uniform closet, and we got clothes, and then we went to the school lunchroom where they had a horrible breakfast of sugar-laden food. Unfortunately, we need to address that as well. Thank you, Bobby Kennedy. But you're absolutely right, and we need to continue to kind of uphold those things that we do want for children: a healthy diet, good sleep, a focus on education, and learning to read and write and do math, and not say because it's happening for every child that shouldn't be happening at all. I think it's a great point. Thank you for that. So that concludes our first M4LU 101. This has been so incredibly fantastic. I want to take a second and say thank you to Robin Steenman, who's the Director of Resources and Moms for Liberty University. A few years ago, I came to Tennessee and I visited Robin's chapter. I had visited a couple times, actually. And Robin was doing this program, and it was just kind of a school year for parents. And she was taking the people of her community through different ideologies and giving them tools and information so she could educate them. Because the mission statement of Moms for Liberty is to unify, educate, and empower parents to defend their parental rights at every level of government. And the unify part, we bring everyone together. But the education part is so important. Because we need to have the tools and information to be able to have conversations with people. I think when I try to do this work, I come from the direction of most people that are involved, not the Alice Baileys and the John Fetzers and the Bill Gates. Sorry, Bill. I don't think you have good intentions. But the majority of people that are doing this work, even the teachers in the classroom, think that they're doing something good. Even when a parent is transitioning their child, as awful as we might think that is, and we know it is, that parent thinks they're doing what's best for their child. And so I think we have to come at this from a place of being willing to have conversations and educate people about these issues. So thank you, everyone, for listening today. And Robin was doing that in her community. And I said, Robin, you've got to bring this all over the country. Every mom and dad in America need to be able to go through this school year for parents. And so we're so excited that Moms for Liberty University is going to be able to help to inform everyone. So let's talk a little bit about what the rest of this month will look like. Next week, you should join me online for SEL 102 with Abigail Schreier, author of the book about social emotional learning and mental health, Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And we'll take a focused look at the portions of her book that cover SEL in our schools. On January 21st, don't miss our first virtual online screening of The Coddling of the American Mind. Be sure to tune in and ask your questions directly of the filmmakers, Ted and Courtney Balaker, immediately after the film. Lastly, on January 28th, Dr. Kalm will join us again for commentary on the New York Times bestseller, The Anxious Generation. That's our book club for this month. If you're not reading, you better start reading now. It's an incredibly important book, eye-opening, and it's going to tackle some of the biggest issues that we have with social media and our children having access to this black mirror all the time that is certainly not serving them well in their lives. And if you can read by yourself, that's great, but why not read with friends? So join us, please. That does it for SEL 101. We do this to help to save America. The purpose of Moms for Liberty is to fight to save America. We are a beacon of light for the rest of the world. And thank you again for joining us. As was famously said by James Madison, the advancement of and diffusion of knowledge is the only true guardian of liberty. That is the mission of M4LU. Have a great night. Thank you so much.